What most people think of as coaching is educational programs disguised as coaching. If we're going to work together, we need to look at all of you.
You quit the same job 5 times. A lot of people try to side hustle. A lot of people jump ship and burn their boats. I've never really talked to anyone that kind of was able to kind of dip their toe in and kind of go back and forth.
I view that journey as informative lessons so I can tell others probably things not to do.
Welcome to another episode of Founders Growth. My name is John Hill, aka Small Mountain. I'm the founder of Adapted Growth, and today on the show we have James Wightman. James is a business and life coach to business owners and has been doing it for longer than I have been in small business working on myself. And so whenever I heard about his story and how long he's been out here in the space, I was excited to talk with him. And we had some very cool conversation that I think is going to help a lot of founders who are, trying to find their way, maybe just getting started. But James, I'm going to pause for just a second. Can you talk a little bit more about who you typically work with in the space? And then we'll kind of jump into the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for having me here. And what I would say, just as someone who works with business owners, I originally started all this in 2013 professionally coaching. But in terms of what I do and who I help, it usually veers on two ends of the spectrum. Oftentimes, it's people that are professionals wanting to start their own business, to coach and share their services. So a lot of times I'll help them. And then on the other end of the spectrum, I have just always been a person, for whatever reason, leaders have wanted me by their side. And so I kind of serve as a confidant, right? They have operations managers, they have people sharing tactics and strategies and helping them in all different areas. And I really love to be the confidant that serves them, that
Well,
is by their side, helping them reset during the week and where they want to direct their focus, their attention. What are the conversations they need to have, the uncomfortable ones? And so those are really the two loves that I've had, is helping people transition into sharing their services.
mhm.
And then for business owners, really serving as a confidant to them. I call it a coach, and really helping them have a reset during the week of what's most important, what are their priorities.
I I love how you're talking about that because one of the things that I have come to realize, like I was just doing this because it was helpful to me on my path, was uh, just kind of giving people space to get it off their chest and to vent, right? And people are not always expecting that from me whenever they're working with me, but it's like, okay, cool, like how's everything else going? And well, John, why are we talking about this? Well, everything has an impact on everything else, right? And if you're, under the weight of rejection, because there's a lot of rejection in sales, if you're feeling like you're not being heard or listened to, right? All of that can really shut down the opportunity to like work on yourself and get to the place that you need to be, right? Like it's not just here's a framework and here's a talk track, and I think a lot of people have a very kind of weird view, misguided view about like what coaching can actually be because sometimes just giving someone some space with a qualified person, right? Like I tell everybody you can't go ask for sales advice from people that have never carried a bag or carried a goal or a number because they don't know how to give you advice that's actually going to help you. And so having that space and giving that to other people, it's what leads to the performance at higher tiers and everything. But a lot of people aren't thinking about that when they're reaching out to coaches and consultants and stuff like that. They're just looking for the help. They're not looking for like the changes that they need to make sometimes, which
Mm.
is, I mean, that's the hard part of this whole thing is like, are you willing to change? Because we all need to change depending upon kind of what we're dealing with and what we're trying to get to. Do you get that same kind of pushback? Like if you're working with a new client and it's kind of early stage and you show up and maybe you're talking about some things that aren't directly related to the operations of the business, the day to day of the business or the revenue of the business, like do you have people confused when you show up as just like as just a confidant, a conduit?
Yeah, I love this question. And, in the past, I would probably get a lot more pushback. I don't as much anymore.
Mhm.
And I think this has happened for two reasons. And just to touch on what you were saying about how people can be surprised, one of my original coaches in sales. He was trained, he trained with Eli Wild and others. In case anybody doesn't know, Eli Wild is Tony Robbins' top salesperson, and I had this coach, and I worked with him for a year, and at the at the end of our coaching, he called me up and he said, "James, I want to hire you for a year to coach me." And I was like, "Wow, this is interesting. This person has made more money than me, all these different things." And what he was really desiring help with was a lot of the other areas outside the strategy. That's how
Mm,
I really entered this work. And I remember at the end of that year, we did a recap call of what the experience was like and everything. And he said something that always stood out to me. And what he said was what most people think of as coaching is educational programs disguised as coaching. And so I think that's what a lot of times people are used to,
mhm,
where they're learning a framework or they're learning a strategy, which those things are wonderful. Just there isn't a lot of space, which you're talking about, which is wonderful that you're providing someone, right? That you're actually giving them the space to share what's really happening because you know that even if somebody has a strategy, if all these other things are happening or they're stressed or they're dealing with a rejection or whatever it might be, then it's going to be very challenging for them to move forward
yeah,
or to even use that strategy. So I love that. I love that you do that. I love that you're sharing that.
yeah,
And one of the things that helped me in my enrollment process of even shifting people's perception is I think of it almost like a house, right? There's different entry points. And so chances are somebody's coming in because maybe they do want help with that practical or that tangible thing, or they want help with reaching that number in your case of sales. And one of the things that I shifted in my own process is I would talk to somebody about that, or I'd help them, with that. And then I transition it to if we're going to work together, we need to look at all of you.
mm,
And so to me, it really just became a natural part of the process that maybe at first they were like, huh? But when I shared, just as you shared, that impacts every other area of what they're trying to achieve or their personal life, I think people become very open. And it's just not the thing that a lot of people know how to lead with. But as a coach, as a facilitator, it's our role to open that up. It's kind of like if somebody's on a sales call, and if they say, I need to look at the money, or they're mentioning the price. There's a lot of things that could mean, but it's almost as though that's the cultural acceptance of I have another question.
mhm.
Um, but it's our role as the leader to know that there's something else there for somebody. Yeah, I'll pause there. Yeah.
I there for a while, I was so focused on just the sales side, right? Of, better process, better conversations, better outcomes. And I was very resistant to talking about all the other stuff, right? The philosophies, like what do you do outside of work? How do you manage your relationships outside of work and everything? And I did it kind of as an experiment with a client and saw that it was hugely helpful to them. And then fast forward, I was working with a guy and I started to ask about like, okay, what does your self-care look like? What is your like your routines look like around work and everything? And it was funny because he was working with me, but he was also working with a Tony Robbins coach. And he goes, "John, I don't know why we're talking about this." And I'm like, "Well, I get it, but a big believer in how you do anything impacts everything else, you know? So while sales is a chaotic job, like let's look at how you handle the chaos of life in these other, capacities." And he was so resistant, right? Because he was like, "I don't know. I don't," and I'm like, "Look, can we just try?" And now it's gotten to the point to where like that stuff is so helpful, right? If they're there for the right reasons and there's room for them to actually change, that now I just kind of brute force my way into it, and it's helpful for anyone who's open to the idea, right? But some people aren't quite there yet. How have you gotten better at getting people to show you the whole picture, right, and be open to the whole idea?
Mm. Yeah, I think there's a couple ways, right? So it's almost like there's just kind of an intuitive temperature with somebody where some people are very focused on the, more the practical or tactical items. And what I've found is that usually I'll try to open the conversation to other things, and I'll read how they're showing up, how they're responding to that. I might even ask, "How are you receiving what we're talking about?" And sometimes that in and of itself just really changes things. The fact that I'm introducing it, they didn't even know that was possible.
Mhm,
Sometimes there's other people who really just want to stay on those strategic items.
mhm,
And I'll go along with that for a little bit, and then usually they'll wonder why something keeps reoccurring or whatever it might be, and then I'll say, we tried to talk about this before, and here's why I think this is occurring. Could we open this back up again?
mhm.
And I found that because they actually want the results so bad, they will then say, "Okay, we'll give it a try." And
Yep,
sometimes their sharing is not as open, not as vulnerable, but at least the space is there, and then there's a development, of that relationship, of that trust.
absolutely. There was a project and, the CEO, he pulls me off. We're doing morning syncs, we're doing the the deeper work and everything, and he pulls me off to the side and he's like, "John, I got a concern." And I was like, "Okay, like, let's talk about it." And he goes, "So my guys are telling me you're talking about self-care with them." And I was like, "Well, yeah, I'm talking about, that you gotta get into your body, you gotta manage your relationships, you gotta eat well, you gotta be healthy, And he was like, "Well, I've got some concerns," and I was like, "Okay, what's your concern?" And he was like, "Well, that they're gonna want more breaks and time away." And I'm just like, "Well, really the goal is to acknowledge that these things are mandatory important things for ourselves, for our performance, and so that way we, bring full focus to work to get our work done, so that way there is actually time and space for these things, right?" And he was an
Mhm.
old school guy, and, he's like, "Well, John, I just don't know." And I'm like, "Well, I mean, okay, that's fair. You wanna go look at the numbers and see if it's helping or hurting?" And he was like, "Well, we don't have to go do that. I already know that we're, ahead of pace and everything." And I was like, "Okay, cool. So if this is working and that concern is not a real concern, do you have any other concerns?" But it's interesting because like most people I would say have never really had like a great coach or a great mentor or that confidant, that space to go talk to and get it all off of the chest, right? Like a lot of people, they might take it to their boss and then it ends up, not broadcasting well, not being heard well, or they might go to HR and then they get, a black mark because they're not a team player and stuff like that. But how do you get people to that space to where, and maybe you can't, like to where they're open to what, like, coaching can bring, right? Because there's a little bit of stigma around coaching and development, and
Mhm.
"I don't need any help," and "help is weakness," and stuff like that. How have you gotten better about talking to people and getting them to, like, accept and maybe some help would be, beneficial?
Yeah, I always find this an interesting. I think there's different philosophies on this, and I think probably if you're working inside an organization, it can be a little different. I tend to work directly with the business owners.
Mhm,
Um, so there's different philosophies on this. Some people have a philosophy of, well, if somebody's not open to this, my goal is not to try to convince them.
oh, yeah.
And I might simply meet that person where they're at. Whereas some people have an approach, and I think it's more of like a personality type thing,
Mhm,
where people can have an approach where they're like, "I'm really gonna reach this person, and I'm gonna say the thing that needs to be said." And I think both are totally valid. I would consider myself more of like a gentle candor type of guy
mhm,
because especially with, the business owners that I work with, they're usually stressed. They usually have to put on a tough face during the day, make the hard
yep,
decisions. So my approach of gentle candor is more of a place where they get to just relax and be. I'm not calling them out on their bullshit, but I'm being very loving while also calling them out on their bullshit if it's needed.
mhm,
But it's in like a really kind way. So for me, I probably am not the best person to be like, I'm going to reach that person who's resistant. I'm more of a when the person's on board, I'll meet them where they're at, which I think
Oh,
is there's a type that's resistant and is like, I don't want anything to do with this, versus the person who's perhaps a little hesitant, but they're open to it. That to me,
yeah,
that's very valid. I think if someone's very resistant to the growth and those other things, I think there can sometimes be something else there
mhm,
that because people you can have people on a team and it's like, well, why is this person on your team if they aren't willing to grow, they aren't they aren't willing to change, they aren't open to other possibilities of
yeah,
just what they can create, and there might be some uncomfortable conversations to be had of what it means to grow. Um, and like what's the balance there? Because sometimes there's some it's an important relationship, and like how do you weigh that with the business? Yeah. Does that make sense?
100%. It 100% does, right? Like, one of the hardest parts for me was being a sales guy and, pushing through dissonance and, you know, trying to do the things that had worked for me in the past, right? And realizing that, good coaching is a pretty soft deliverable, right? You can't just put it in their hands and then they're immediately and forever changed, right? Like, and one of the lines that I have to remind myself all the time about is like, I can't have the cape on for someone who doesn't want to be saved, And
Mm,
so, being okay with no, because this is a soft deliverable and it's not like a phone or like a test drive on a car to where expectations are immediately met. It's, are you open at all, right? Or do I have to prove, right? Because if I have to prove every step that, you know, trying matters and trying is worth your time and everything, we're not going to get anything done. And so one of the hard parts was like being really okay with the fact that like I'm not going to try to talk everybody into it, right? Or, all these things, and really just looking for those people that are, as you said, open to it, but not exactly sure what it looks like, or already aware. They're very, open to it. They know that they need to change. They know that they need some help and stuff like that. But that was a very tough switch, in my early days, especially coming from sales and having a goal and knowing that you gotta push forward and follow up is sometimes more beneficial in hard products and hard deliverables than it is in soft, and so that's been just something that I think is very interesting because 'cause I've never been, like, a super hard salesperson, but I think I've gotten softer is what all my sales friends would call me, but clearer is how I think about it on my own path, right? Because if you don't think you need help, you're right, right? In the form that I'm not going to be able to help you. So let's just put it down and go find someone else to talk to. Um,
yeah. This is yeah, I think this is so key, and it also applies in the coaching world too, because one of the things that I'll share it with clients or fellow coaches, depending on who they're working with. I'll say, I can't want something more than somebody wants it themselves,
100%.
because nothing is going to come of it. I can't brute force someone along, and I love that you're touching on this because there is such an importance and clarity of what you're talking about, where in a sense you're becoming so clear that it's inviting somebody to make a distinction for themselves of whether they do want something or don't want something for themselves in their life, and especially I imagine earlier on in sales or even for coaches. um, when you hear those no's and things and you're still developing your skill, the way that you want to do
Mhm.
things, it's so easy to go, well, is it me? Did I do something wrong?
Oh,
And
yeah.
is this rejection or whatever it might be? And so, yeah, this is so good.
Like, the it's not a no for forever, it's a no for today is a thing that,
Mhm,
like, every sales professional who's spent any time in the role, like, understands, but there is that moment that when you're going out as a coach or consultant, right, and you're putting yourself out there, if you've not gotten to the place to where you have built like a methodology or a framework or a way of thinking or anything else like this, it is kind of just you.
mhm.
And if you're not familiar with like sales mindset and detaching from the outcome, and people are allowed to have their own preferences and their own desires and priorities, it's gonna feel like character assassination. you know?
Mhm.
And so, that's one of the things that we have to kind of talk about with people is that you're not selling yourself, right? You're selling your ability to help them, right? And so we, spend a lot of time talking with people about like if it is a soft deliverable, like make it a thing. Don't just say like, well, I'm just going to help you, right? Like, the thing that I teach people is called Sherpa. And so it makes it a little bit easier to kind of talk about that you're not just going to be working with me. I'm not just going to be like, waxing poetic in our meetings or whatever. There is curriculum. There is a guided approach to this whole thing. But it's too easy to take it as like character assassination that they're saying no to you, right? And if you come from a place of subject matter expertise and that's aligned with your personality, oh, that's some heavy weight, right? To just go around and it becomes easy to want to avoid that rejection and procrastinate on doing outreach and put yourself in hot waters, right? So it's a very common thing that we run into. And I'm glad that you talked about it because a lot of people don't understand that like even salespeople that I've worked with that have sold something else that are now selling themselves struggle a little bit with like reconnecting not to the product that they sold or the service that they sold, but the solution that is what they provide, you know? It's
Mhm.
a it's a different way of running through the conversation and looking for your people. Um, Changing gears, because I wanna talk about your path a little bit because we talked about some cool stuff whenever we first
Yeah.
connected around this. You said a thing that I've just been sitting with and thinking about. You quit the same job 5 times, like the same job with the same company 5 times until you actually kinda decided to stay away and launch this thing and get it to where you were going. Can you talk a little bit about that time? Like I think a lot of people try to side hustle, a lot of people jump ship and burn their boats and everything else like this. I've never really talked to anyone that kind of was able to kind of dip their toe in and kind of go back and forth the way that you did. And I'm curious, do you think it was helpful? Do you think it slowed you down? Do you think that it was just the right thing for you?
Yeah, I think it was the right thing for me, especially because I had seen so many different ways people leave their jobs. I
Mhm,
remember when I was even looking at leaving in the first place, I was living in New York City, and I reached out to someone, they're like, "Well, you need a year's worth of savings and all these different things." And based on the amount that I was making, I was like, "Well, I'm never gonna have a
mhm,
year's worth of savings, just like where I'm at." Like, even having a couple months of savings feels really odd.
yeah,
Not odd or just unattainable in that moment. And so I must have really had, people that loved me in my life to have the right support to be able to do this, or however things aligned. I very much been, I was in my early 20s, so my family always had the philosophy, like, get these things out of your system now, because especially when you have kids or other things at a later point, it's not that you can't do them, it just becomes more difficult to take more risks.
mhm,
Um, but I think there's a spirit in that ability to try something new, to take risks. So I view that journey as, uh, it'll informative lessons, so I can tell others probably things not to do, or
mhm,
different ways to look at it.
yeah. That's
Because
the
I
whole
think I
point
had
of
a
this
lot.
show.
What'd you say?
So that's the whole point of this show is to help people, like, avoid some of these, like, missteps that we all just have a habit of falling into. Sorry for cutting you off. Please continue,
No,
though.
you're good. So we're at that time, my thinking was that, I wanted to have this business, wanted to leave the job. I did not want to be, doing what I was doing, even though I was, coaching, I was working in education. And most people would look at that and be like, "This is great. He's set." And we can feel inside when we want something different, or we want to step into something new, or we want to create. And it's important to meet that need. And so the way that really all of this transpired, I remember I'd never heard of Tony Robbins. Um, and I had a coworker that would bring, his name up. And somehow I found out that, Yeah, I there was some money that became available for me to use for development. And I was like, "You know what? I'm just gonna go to Tony Robbins." And so I went to Tony Robbins, and I did not look any I'm one of those people that I do not really look up anything beforehand. I just wanna have the experience,
Mm,
as it
okay.
is, and I went, and it was one of the most life-changing experiences, uh, that I ever had.
Mhm,
He's a performer, there's thousands of people, but the principles in development are really key to life, and I remember, before then, I was feeling this, and I'd gone to see a therapist, and I was like, "Okay, this is neat, we're talking about these things," but whatever I experienced during that weekend was powerful to help me tune into what is it that I really want. And I think that's really the key, is just tuning into what is it that we really want. And something blew open there for me where I had flashbacks to when I was little, and I remember I loved magic and all different things, and had fun. And I felt like I lost those things in my life. And Tony Robbins used a thing called NLP. And so I came back and I signed up for an NLP course.
mhm.
And I don't know if I was just following this idea of like flowing with the universe or these other things, but I just started making new choices, new decisions. And I took an NLP course, and then I was like, oh, they're doing a level 2 to become a master practitioner. How can I do this? And I was able to, for however I coordinated my decisions, I was able to get the money for the level 2. And I did that. And something just really opened up in me. And I was like, you know what? I want to travel. And what I did was I wrote a proposal, and this was at a time where people having remote jobs was not as common of a thing.
Mhm,
And so I wrote a proposal to have my role be remote because I was like, I'd like more flexibility. I'd like to be able to travel. And I wrote it up. The thing was like 2 pages. It was very clear how this could work, was organized. And I remember I shared it with my boss, my mentor at the time. And he was like, this is good. This is something that we can't do now, but we'll consider it in the future and stuff. I was like, okay. And then, oh, I did that originally after I came back from Tony Robbins. Then I took the NLP. I'm just like reflecting on it. Then I took the NLP, and then something occurred for me during this. And I remember I called him up, and I was like, hey, I just want to let you know, I decided that I'm going to be leaving. And not gonna be working here anymore. And he said, "Where are you going?" Well, John, I didn't have a clue, but the first thing that came to me and where I always wanted to be was Portland, Oregon. And I said, "Portland, Oregon." And he said, "Do you have a job out there?" "Nope, I don't have a job out there." But there was something courageous about quitting, like energetically, that was a shift of me
mhm.
going, "Oh, I'm not choosing this anymore. I'm really something else is more important to me." And he was like, "Okay, just wanna make sure you're okay. It's great." And then, um, I think a week later, we're together, and he goes, "Here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna do a test run. We're gonna make your job remote." And I said,
Wow, okay.
"Okay, this is interesting." So, I was able to do that for probably a year. And so I was able to travel, I was able to work more on my business and different things like that, and it didn't progress at the rate that I desired it, but I developed a ton during that time.
Mhm,
And I came back to New York City after a year. I mean, I popped back here and there, but I came back. And at the same time, I had met now my wife Ellie, and during that, I was like, working on this business. I still wanna work on it, but it doesn't make sense for me to keep traveling. And so had another conversation with my mentor, and we stayed on, and I had to decide, do I want to stay? Do I want to go somewhere else? And so I was in the attempts of quitting again. And so I guess this is time number 2. And we worked out what the role would look like and those types of things. And so I was able to stay, have a more solid relationship, 'cause I just met my wife and,
Mhm,
we got we started dating and all those things, and um, so yeah, then, there were just periods of time where I had to make a decision. Do I wanna take the next step, or what might it be? And we always ended up, finding a way to rework something.
mhm,
And then finally, um I had clients and a lot of different things, and I was balancing it. And maybe couple more years later, I think it was around when COVID hit, and I was like, I'm not dealing with this stuff anymore. I'm just going all in on the business, continuing it, because I reached a point where I felt I could do that,
mhm.
and so that's what I did. Um, and, there's probably more details that I could share in there, but I feel like that's a good kind of like overview of some defining moments that changed the trajectory of uh, me having the sense of where I could go, like what was possible. And also, I think life brings in a lot of different things. Like this person's no longer here with us, but I remember during that time I wanted to live in Portland, and I put like a message up and a board, and I was like, "Hey, I got $500 a month for rent. Like, is there a place I could stay?" And everyone said, "No, no, no, you're not going to find anything for that here." And then somebody said yes, and I ended up staying with them. We became good friends, and they had an issue where they were wanting to delete themselves from the world, and ended up getting them the right help, the right support. And we'd stayed friends for years. They had other stuff come up later, and we weren't as connected, so they aren't here anymore. But to me, to like that wouldn't have happened if all those other things didn't connect, and that was like a
Yeah.
life changing moment. So yeah, there's a few things I have in here. So let me pause there. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanna dig into some of that. Like, so, the, I think that the season of becoming really coachable, right, and understanding just, like, how much work there is to do on ourselves is always kind of a unique time, you know?
Hmm.
Um, so going back to that first Tony Robbins event, I've never been to a Tony Robbins event, and I've heard everything
Yeah.
from it's amazing to it's a grift, and everything in
Mhm.
between. Um, were you looking for that? Or was it this person was just talking about it, and so you decided to just do it on a whim?
Yeah, I think I've typically been a person that is open to yeah, just to different ideas and growth. I think that's pretty common with sales and people in business. There's a certain sense of growth and progress that we like.
Mhm,
And so something resonated, and I at least looked at the site and all those different things to have a sense of what I was walking into, but not really knowing exactly what the experience would be like.
mhm,
And so I think when I got there, I could totally see how people could see it as a grift. Um, However, I think from the openness, I really received it as these foundational principles of making a change in our own life and the way that we think and the way that we operate, and having a sense of how we operate so we can move forward.
mhm.
So yeah, I was pretty receptive and open. Yeah.
When you talk about, coming back to work after that event and then deciding to keep pushing yourself and developing yourself and everything, there's this like moment in time where I talk about with people of when you become aware of the choices that you really have in front of you, as opposed to just waiting for the most opportune choice to like make like show up like the only real option that you have, right?
Mhm.
And this makes me very unpopular with some of my friends and some of my family, because I do think that everything is a choice, right? And if you're waiting around for permission versus just willing to go out and kind of work on what you want to work on, like it can make you kind of a weird person, right? Whenever
Mhm.
you're in conversations or around your friends and everything, is that's how it feels for me, right? That for a long time I wasn't really looking at all the options I had. I was just looking for like the easiest option, and stuff
Mhm.
like that. Is that kind of how it felt for you when you were going through this stuff and, figuring out, who you wanted to be when you grew up.
Sure. Yeah. There there's a couple different things that come through for me here. And I think one of the things that I became aware of, and I'm sure this has to do with upbringing and other things, but I had a strong sort of a strong leaning towards making sure that there was always an exit in some capacity, right? Because there's this balance of I'm committed to something
Mhm,
and there's no exit, or I'm going to see it through, and just having a sense that I've made a decision, I'm committed.
mhm,
And then this other side of there can be choices in front of us, and am I choosing the safe choice? Do I want to make sure that I have a potential exit for something so I can keep myself safe? And I think there's different times for different approaches, because one of the things that I became aware of, and I became aware of this in my relationship with my wife early on, a year in, um, there were just challenges that are happening, and I had to share. I said, I'd really like for us to see a relationship therapist,
mhm,
because if we don't, we aren't going to be together. I know that, and she was scared, and we're it's funny. It's like we're scared to go because we think the person's gonna be like, "Yeah, you 2 don't work," and we're going because we want to work. And, thankfully, we worked through those things, but one of the things that I realized is people are not an Amazon Prime package. They don't just appear and we go, "Oh, there's a little scratch here," or,
mhm,
there's something a little off here. Can I return it for a different version or a replacement? And people are who they are. And I realized I would kind of there's an idea of being with what is, and being with the person and loving them, and at the same time, I think this applies to so many decisions. If we can be with what we really want, sometimes it's just the lens that we're thinking of from how much we want it that we think we need to make the rash decision, or these other things. But when we
mhm,
can be open to like what are really the choices, what could we commit to, what is the risk that we're willing to balance, I think that can really help with making the decisions, rather than, as you were saying earlier, that we might go, you know what, I might take the safe decision, or I'm gonna wait for somebody else's permission to go do the thing.
mhm.
Whereas if we can realize we might be being called forward to something, it's this balance of, can we know that we're being called forward, versus when when is there this moment where we might just be having a felt sense of fear, right? Which is what I discover in the relationship around commitment, particularly in this case to another human being, right? Because human beings are not fixed. Like I can put together an IKEA shelf, absolutely. That's not changing on me. That I can work with. People, very dynamic, changing. It can bring up a lot.
Yeah,
And so yeah, but I think that's what's coming through in terms of looking at decisions. Are we being called forth to something, or do we kind of just have a fear coming up because we don't know how someone's going to respond? Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, and, like, I think we could probably keep going down this path of, like, okay, where is that fear coming from and how,
Hmm.
because one of the things that I think is super important to this whole conversation is, if they don't have clarity of direction, right, in the form of goals, right, it's gonna
Hmm.
be really hard to help them, right, because 'cause they're gonna be able to, avoid the uncomfortable, avoid the things that are, that they wanna procrastinate on and stuff like that, and so,
Hmm.
the fact that you're allowed to have big goals is kind of a weird concept to certain people, of like you're allowed to push, you're allowed to wanna go be more, and that's kind of like the first choice, right? Is the first sell is to yourself that you're allowed to go push for more and to go. It doesn't make you crazy. It doesn't make you unhireable. It doesn't make you any of these things, right? If you feel, and I love that language, called to, you know, then it's okay, right? Don't backpedal and be like, well, I'm crazy, it's just a crazy
Hmm.
thought, and labeling it all badly and everything, because that just shuts you down from ever being able to take the jump, right? And I also love that you weren't selling yourself on the idea that it had to be this way and it had to work and stuff like that, because I think I see a lot of people who get caught up in the identity of being a founder or entrepreneur or whatever,
Mhm.
and then it's not working, but they've got sunk cost and they've got their identity wrapped up in this label, and then it feels like a failure to go back to a lane of consistency just in the form of a job. Like, there's not anything wrong with that. So, like, acknowledging, that we're going to develop, and I call them seasons, which is very helpful for me because I'm a pretty rigid person just by default. So the fact that I'm going to be in different seasons, and that means different things, and then also just trying to not be so rigid around
Mhm.
I am now this and I am now that and these things, because it can do as much help as it does harm, in my experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And there can be a holding on to things. Sometimes I don't like to use I like the phrase letting go, but sometimes in this case, I probably wouldn't use the phrase letting go. Um, because we can have a way that we know to do things
Mm,
or that has worked before that is so easy to hold on to. Like I'm going through that now with some different things related to the business where I know there's things that work that I've done before, and then something energetically, something in me goes is just going, I'm not really feeling it.
mhm,
And it's in the past, I would have been like, "Oh, I need to scratch that and go to something completely new," and it's more of a, "What if I could just let that be and be open
mhm,
to a new way, a new approach?" Because perhaps I think maybe it comes from Buddhism, right? If people have a glass that's full and you're pouring into it, it's just, everything else is just gonna go to the side. So, could
mhm,
I allow myself to empty, right? To be open again. Not that I have to get rid of everything, uh, but just that I'm not holding on to it. That it's the thing that I need. And so I think similarly, as you're talking about, having goals, we can have a goal, but are we holding on to it because we're making it mean something if we haven't yet achieved it? Or are we making it mean something if we have to go back to a job or have something part time? Um, which very much happened for me during that time of quitting the same job 5 times. I took on something part time so I could diversify
mhm.
my income. So that actually helped me feel much more secure because it didn't feel like my identity was in this one job. I
Yeah.
was more in tune for myself, what I wanted, and making the choices that I wanted, which I think is really important, right? If we tune in, are we making choices in our profession or our business that we're going that is not the decision that we really want because we're afraid that we're going to lose something or we're holding on to something or we have these sunk costs like you're talking about.
Mhm.
And oftentimes we're kicking the can down the road for those types of things.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Epic. Great. Uh, I'm hoping that people are gonna have some space and some room when they're listening to this, because I think we're talking on some very deep topics that would be very easy to gloss over if you're not doing some deeper work on yourself, But I'm hoping that anyone who's listening to this has some space to really dive into this.
Could I share something on that?
Please, yeah, please do. Yeah.
Yeah. There was a client that I worked with that very much had taken part in business programs, and we did work together. And he said, "You know what I realized, James?" He said, "With a lot of the different programs and the things that I've done, I set goals. I learned things about business, but the last person I focused on was myself."
Mm,
And he that was part of our work is what are the things that he wanted in his life? What are the ways that he wanted to approach it? And he kept saying this. He'd say, "James, I don't really have a vision." And we'd talk what came through is he said, "I have goals, but I don't have a vision."
mm,
And what we started to do was craft a vision of what does that really look like, and then how do the goals tie into that? So one of the
yeah.
things that he would put is, I want to be a light in my community. And that started to show up in so many different ways. It changed the way how he had conversations with his team, how he had conversations with somebody at the store, how he had conversations in his family, because that was really important to him. It wasn't an identity in the business, it was really what he wanted. He
Mhm.
had 5 businesses and ended up closing like 3 of them
Wow.
because he realized they weren't in alignment anymore. And
Oh, yeah.
from that work, he ended up having his most profitable year in a decade. And so, if somebody could hear this and truly listen, right, to listen for the gold in this, when you tune into what you want and the vision, then see how are the goals matching and aligning with that? Is it the truth of what you want, the truth of what you want to create? Um, because when you can come from that space, everything else will follow.
Wow. Yeah. Man, I've had a lot of goals that got me really fired up, and they were just for the sake of goals, right?
Hmm.
And one of the things that I have to talk about with every leadership person, salesperson, is that there's greatness in having a quota, right? Because it's a very clear line in the sand that a lot of other people inside of an organization never have that clarity on, right? Like my one job not in sales was so uncomfortable because it was always like, we'll just keep doing more, keep doing more, keep doing more. And I could never really have clarity of like, okay, what does good work look like inside of here, you
Mm,
know? And whereas in sales, like, if they're doing it right, there's a goal and a quota, right? But if you're just doing it for them and you're not doing it for yourself, right?
mhm,
It's gonna be a little gappy. It's gonna be hard to do the harder things, you know? And then the other thing that I try to talk about with people is like, you can put yourself under really bad goal weight, right? Like, sell yourself that, and I worked with a guy who dealt with this, right? He had crazy, crazy, massive big goals, but when he, put himself under the weight, he didn't really have a plan or a path for how he was going to get to those goals. And so, he goes, well, man, I'm 5 years in, I'm not on my goals. And I was like, okay, what are your goals? And it was like moving to another country, right? And like buying in and doing it the right way. I mean, it was gonna be very expensive and everything. And I was like, cool, what was your reverse engineered plan and path to those goals? Well, John, I don't have that. Well, no wonder you miss those goals, right? And then no wonder you feel really depressed and like a failure because you've been telling yourself that you're not successful if you don't hit these goals, but you don't have a plan or a path to hit these goals. And so sometimes, it's supposed to be centering, it's supposed to be energizing, it's supposed to create focus, but if it's too big, it's just going to shut you down, right?
yeah.
And then you're going to start thinking how to get around the problem as opposed to just doing the actions and activities that get you to the goal. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the best ways for any leaders or business owners that are listening, especially, when you have these quotas and goals for your team, one of the best things that you can do is to understand their individual visions, because what I've found is, especially when people have team members that they're like, I don't know how this person's doing. Do I want them or don't I want them?
mhm,
One of the most meaningful conversations you can have with someone is about the vision of what they really want for their life. Like, what are they looking forward to? What are they wanting to do?
mhm,
And that is actually a way that a lot of business owners have peacefully separated with team members, because it occurred to the team member, they're going, why am I here? And the the owner was like, well, let's help you reach your vision, right? And was able to get them a different connection or make recommendations. And they were able to peacefully and separate and still remain friends, or connected. And at the same time, for the people that did want to be there, it just only fueled them,
hmm.
and it created a better relationship.
Changing gears a little bit because I have some notes here about things we talked about
Yeah.
to get set up for this call, right? And one of the things you talked about, which is very interesting, is overthinking and overplanning, killing some early opportunities, right? And I am by default a man with a plan, right? Like I need to have a plan and some very clear expectations and stuff like that. How does that show up for you? The overthinking and shutting it down. How do you work with people to keep them from making that same mistake?
Mm. Yeah. This is interesting. I think it ties into the decision making we were talking about
Mm,
earlier.
okay.
So the way that I think of this is when we're not directly involved in something yet, we can often see opportunity, we can see possibility, we can see what we're moving towards. And, we can be lit up and we can be excited. At some point when we're in it, there's going to be a moment where, as Seth Godin calls it, the dip,
Mhm.
where it's like, is this working? Do I need to change gears? All these different things. And
Mhm.
so I always, in those moments, encourage people to reference where they were in the beginning, because sometimes we want to have a sense of, is this really solid? Because we might just be going through a moment where we're in the middle of it, verse, is this something that even in the beginning we weren't that excited about it, and it's just something that was on a board that we didn't think through,
Yeah.
and that might be something to drop. However, if you were excited in the beginning, if it was clear, if you saw clear opportunity before you were even tied into it, and most of what you're doing is working, then you're probably on the right path. You might just be going through a moment. So I
Mhm.
always like to reference what was the beginning, what was the start. And I've just found that useful myself in case there's been moments, because yeah, I think that can easily happen. We can overplan. We can think through something. We can. I don't say analyze. I say analyze, right? Because we're being anal about it. Like we're looking at every little detail,
Mhm.
and that's when we start to uh, focus on the cracks in things
Mhm.
rather than looking at things as a whole, the things that are going well. Is it just a small piece and we're focusing on it? Or if we zoom out, are most things going well and there's just this one piece that needs to be adjusted?
Yeah.
Did that answer what you were thinking?
Yeah, like, I mean, once again, I think it's one of those things that, people need to be moving slow when they're listening to this to be able to hear kind of the thing
Hmm.
that is being said there, but, the other thing, right, and I think that that question leads to this question, you talked about one of the bigger struggles is, like, keeping focus where it needs to be, right, and not just
Hmm.
being productive and staying busy, but actually being effective, right?
Yeah.
Um, how does that how do you work on that for yourself? And then how do you work on that with clients that are clinging to that I just want to feel busy. I just want to check things off and check the boxes and
Hmm.
everything.
Yeah. So there's a few pieces here. For me, I'm a big fan of, doing a brain dump of things, right? Whether it's to-do lists or whatever it might be. And then looking at that and saying, here's all the things on my list. What's the purpose of me doing these things? A general purpose. You don't have to get too detailed for each one. And is there a more effective way for me to approach this? Is there one thing that I could do that would take care of a whole bunch of these things on the list?
Hmm.
So, I'll use the example of that one client, right? Who we said being a light in the community, right? If we had gone over every single thing that perhaps was on his to-do list, right? Of I need to fix this about the business and this with the company and move these people around. Um, that would have taken a lot of different strategy and effort.
Hmm.
And when we realized him understanding how to have more effective and powerful conversations with his people, that took care of a few things. That took care of building a better relationship,
Mhm.
um, building respect again with each other, and on top of that, that also led to understanding the difference um, in how they operate. So a lot of businesses will use, SOPs, standard operating procedures,
Mhm.
and people usually, they'll pass those off. But one of the things that I like to share is there's a concept called expectations versus agreements. And so when I train people on conversations, they don't realize that they have so many expectations and their employees have expectations. So, how do you start to form agreements with people? And
Mhm.
some business owners will be like, Well, I do have expectations. I've hired them. This is their role, and that's great and all. And you're still encountering these issues. So how about we talk about how to form proper agreements?
Yep.
And when they understand how to form proper agreements, it can take care of so many to-dos because they no longer have the monkey on their back,
Mhm.
and they're able to give the work back to the person if they ask. So there's these little uh, micro adjustments that can be very effective. So that's the way that I like to think about it is what are some small tweaks that you can make that might take care of a few things on the list? So with this person, it was the conversations, and that took care of the relationship, how they operated the business, having agreements on how things worked instead of just having expectations.
Mhm.
And that took so much off the owner's plate that
Yeah.
allowed him to focus on his zone of genius, cleared up more of his to-do list, actually allowed other people to operate in their zone of genius, to feel like they were helping, they had a better sense of their role, it became
Mhm.
very clear, and so that's what I mean by, um, really focusing on being effective over productive, because it can be so tempting to be like, "Hey, I got these things on the list
Yeah.
and I need to do them." But what you're doing is you're stealing away your own time and opportunity to relax, to spend time with family, to have time to reset, you know?
Absolutely. Right. I always find it interesting whenever someone, if I work with them for a while and they'll start to see how the stuff that we're talking about in their sales conversation starts to show up in all of their conversations if they're open to
Mhm.
it, and they'll always come in and be like, "Oh, John, like I got to do the this technique." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, cool." In a sales call, I'm like, "Well, no, I was talking with like a friend or a family member." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, cool." And they're like, "Well, there's always this moment of like, am I supposed to be doing this over here?" And it's like, this is not just ways to convert deals and manipulate people. Like, this is
Yeah.
just I call it communicating in a face up
Mhm.
manner, right? And what I find is like a lot of leaders are expecting to be heard, right? But they don't always put in the effort to broadcast well and make sure that they've actually got really clean, clear agreements with people. And so the same qualities that lead to high level sales performance, right, are the same concepts that leadership people need to be working on for themselves in their own broadcasting because they're selling to an interior customer, which is their team or their people. And salespeople, it's a trial by fire, right? If you can't actually get a real connection with someone and get their walls down, you're not getting a deal done. You're going to be on borrowed time, and it's going to be some very uncomfortable conversations. But
Yeah.
leadership people, it takes them longer, I would say, to see some of these gaps in how they broadcast and how they communicate with their people.
Yeah. Yeah,
Mm.
there's a great book that I love, I think it's John Maxwell called The 5 Levels of Leadership,
Okay.
and he talks about how there's 5 levels of leadership. You can, you don't have to read the book, there's like a 20-minute YouTube video,
Mhm.
um, but he talks about how a lot of times leaders will just think they're on level 5 with everybody, and
Mhm.
really you're on level 1. They're there because you're paying them, and
Yep.
that's the reason that they're there. You haven't built a relationship, you haven't earned trust, you haven't been they aren't experiencing service leadership from you. And so if they can realize that every person they meet, you're on level 1, they don't really know you, and you get to build a relationship there, and it doesn't have to go slow. It can absolutely go very smoothly and fast with people,
Mhm.
and that varies. Um, but yeah, I think that it's just a really powerful concept that can change the way that especially leaders and owners see how somebody's showing up because they might just be like, "Okay, you're the owner, you're my boss, I'm listening to you because you're my boss and you're paying me." But once you can build more of a real connection, you're gonna have someone really, really caring about the business, caring about you, and it makes a big difference.
Absolutely. I love that idea that you shouldn't be walking around expecting to start at a 5, right? And,
Mhm.
salespeople, God, they just have to learn this, like, so quickly, right? Because if you're walking around and I spent 10 years, right? Struggling with this concept of like, "Hey, I'm pretty smart. You should just listen to me," right? As opposed
Mhm.
to, how do I get them excited to listen, and how do I earn the trust so that way whenever we do kind of have to challenge a perception or a way of thinking or whatever, they go with me and they don't just get defensive and try to shut it down and everything. Like there's that's as much art as it is skill, right, for salespeople. But I love that idea of, like, you shouldn't be expecting to just start from a place of trust with everybody, right? You do need to
Mhm.
earn it. That's really well said. Switching gears because I wanna be super respectful of your time, James, and really appreciate you coming on here.
Yeah.
As a coach, right? And there's lots of ideas about coaching as we kind of have been talking about here. If someone is going out on their own, at what stage would you recommend that they get a coach, and how would you advise a brand new founder to think about, finding a coach, finding accountability, finding someone that they can do this? Is that something that they start with? Is there a certain place of or time in their developmental path that, like, it makes more sense to seek this out? Like, what are your thoughts on that for someone who's brand new?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love this because, I was talking to someone uh the other day. They invest in businesses, and they said, "Hey James, I have different founders, and I think, at different times they're going to need a coach." Um and so, speaking directly to your question, I think there's a few things to consider. So there's consulting, there's coaching, and to make it really clear for people, consulting can be very helpful when you want to have direction, a strategy, a plan for something. So if someone's needing something in that realm, consulting can be really helpful. When it comes to coaching, typically, coaching is going to be more about tapping into your inner wisdom, taking action on the things that you already know that you've learned. And so, as someone's on their path, as somebody's on their journey, I would have them check in with themselves. Do they have they gone through trainings? Do they know enough that they have a clear sense of the steps that they need to take?
Mhm,
Uh, and that can be very helpful. So, do you need more strategy? There's educational aspects to coaching. Some people may provide that. If that's what you need, you probably want more of a strategic coach type thing.
mhm,
If you know your stuff and it's more about taking the action or having a reset during the week or wanting to just make sure that you have someone that's helping you bring out your inner wisdom, the direction that you want to go, then I'd probably look more for a traditional style coach, right? And there's blends of these, but that's how I would have a sense to look for. And then in terms of where somebody is at in their journey, there's a concept in coaching that a good coach always has a coach, because it's part of the growth. So someone that's a business owner and a founder, they're going out on their own. Yeah, ask yourself: Are you needing strategy, or is it more that you're wanting to personally develop so you can take action? That's the way that I would think about it. I think it's more, what's the thing that you need at the time? Because
mm,
I know people that have all different coaches. Um, or coaches just throughout at many different times. If you find that you are going between a lot of different coaches, the question you might want to ask yourself is, what has me going to so many different coaches? Because sometimes someone will be like, I have 5 coaches right now. I'm like, well, what aren't you getting from those coaches that you could get from a really good coach?
yeah.
Um, and not that that's good or bad, it's just something to consider, and being open to what they really need support with in the moment.
Hmm, that's a great answer. When you think about your path, um, what is the lesson that you can now see and appreciate, right? The tweet, the LinkedIn post, right? That really resonates now, but you had to go through it and learn it the hard way before you could appreciate it.
Mm, yeah. I remember I was in a session, and the wisdom that came through was, pursue what is meaningful and not what is expedient.
Okay, yeah.
For a long time, I really chased what was expedient, the next win, the next result,
Mhm.
and what I would say is when you can really get in tune with yourself of what would be meaningful to you, what would be meaningful in your life that you want to create, then it starts to become really clear of the path that you're on, what you want to do, as opposed to just trying to get the next quick win to feel
Mhm.
good, or to get the next quick thing off your plate. When you can really tune into pursuing what's meaningful to you, that's what's going to add up. That's what will add up.
Interesting. I'm gonna throw you a curveball here because,
Yeah.
I really appreciate this conversation. A lot of people try to coach, right? They hit the scene, they try, a lot of people flame out, a lot of people make pivots, and, I'm not judging anybody who makes a pivot or decides to go do something else. What is something that someone who is thinking about becoming a coach, what should they be thinking or feeling that indicates that, like, coaching is the right path for them?
Yeah, I love that. And if you hear any screaming, that could be my child.
No, you're totally
Um,
good, man, absolutely.
so, so yeah, I think there's a few things here that I really love that I think are important. Yes, someone can look at coaching, they can say, "Hey, there's no overhead." And that's actually one of the things that made me fall in love with coaching is there's a Bob Proctor quote where he talks about if you dropped him in any country, he could still become rich even not knowing anybody. And it had to do with conversations. I became fascinated. How can you create money out of thin air, kind of out of nothing, just
Mhm,
through our words? And that's appealing with coaching. Here's what I think people should know. When you look at the coaching and you look at the coaching industry, um, well, first, let me start with someone who might be looking at this. You have to ask yourself, do you really enjoy time with people? If you
yeah,
don't enjoy time with people, I would not recommend going into coaching. However, if you do enjoy time with people, then yes, coaching could be really great. And it's more about helping people tap into their inner wisdom. And yes, you may have strategies to teach that they could learn. However, knowing that there's that balance, if you can hold a balance between I'm not just teaching, I'm going to give the space for someone to come into their own wisdom,
mhm,
then yes, coaching could be very good. And if you, yeah, I think it's just really key around enjoying spending time with people, knowing that things can happen fast, but to give yourself space
mhm,
to create. If they are entering into coaching, still have a way for money to be coming in, just in case things don't move as fast as you would like.
100%.
So, yeah, so those are some things to think about. As someone's looking at the coaching industry, here's something I think they should know. Most of what you see online is educational programs that are called coaching, but is not the true essence of coaching.
Mhm,
So, educational programs are great. You may see a bunch of people in a group. You may be teaching something, and that can be very useful. There, people approach ads, organic marketing. Those things can work. What I think is really important to place someone's emphasis on is understanding how to have powerful conversations. Um, so there's a gentleman named Steve Chandler who is great to great to learn from. But it's how can I have a conversation so powerful with someone that they would want to continue doing more work together? They may ask because here's what I've found. A lot of times people focus on organic marketing or ads and a lot of these other things. And it's not always reliable, but what is very reliable, especially as you're starting out and you're building your business, is knowing how many people you're having a conversation with to make a difference for and making invitations. That is so easy to count
yep,
and is clear of whether you are doing what is needed, not to get clients, but to create clients. Um, yeah, that's what I would say. I think that's an important distinction for people because many times people come to me and they're like, "James, I tried organic marketing, I tried ads, I did these things." And I'm like,
mhm,
"Well, do you have conversations during the week? Let me see your calendar."
Oh, yeah.
Um, yeah.
And it's bone dry, right?
Sure, yeah, 'cause they're a lot of times they're so focused on the strategy or the post
100%.
or whatever seems appealing that might feel good so we can look like,
Oh,
just a
yeah.
personality talking, you know?
Mhm.
It's appealing, uh, but it takes a lot, yeah.
Yeah. Two very important kind of things that I would love to zero in on there. Having opinions about things and thinking that your job as the coach is just to like shout your opinions and make people follow your is not coaching. Like
Right.
it's not, like half of the battle of being an opinionated person and being a subject matter expert, if you're coaching other people, is shutting up so that way you're providing a path for them to see it, right? It's kind of like as a kid, I would go ask my mom like what a word meant, and her universal answer was like, "Well, if you look it up, you'll then know for yourself," And so,
Mm,
to me, I think a lot of people think, "Well, I'm smart, I'm opinionated, I got hard opinions." So that does not mean that you're ready to be a coach, right? It just means that you might be ready to be a pundit, but being a good coach is like putting and creating the space for them to find the right answer for them that they can action, right? And I love you didn't say it as quite as clearly as that, but like that's what I'm hearing behind what you're saying is that
mhm,
like you have to be good enough and practice enough, not just at the skill or the craft that you're trying to coach on, but you have to develop yourself as a coach that way you can shut up and like be like, oh, is that the right way to do it? As opposed to like, hey, dummy, don't do that, which
right,
takes a lot of space, a lot of development of yourself to be that kind of coach. Um, and then the other part that you were talking about was like there at the end of it of um if you don't want to have conversations with people, like you're not in the right lane, like
mhm,
one of my I was working with someone and they had a call and I was like, "Cool, how'd the call go?" "Oh man, it was a complete waste of time." I'm like, "Okay, why?" And they're like, "Well, they didn't know what they wanted. They weren't ready to buy." And I'm like, so someone actually came to you early enough in their research and process that they're not clear, and they're looking to you as someone who can help guide them to this thing, and you think you're too good for that. You think that that's not part of the like who is going to educate and inform them? Like when are you going to get a better opportunity to improve your understanding of how your people operate and think if you're not having those kinds of conversations? And it's always flooring to me whenever I'm talking to someone who wants to be a consultant, but they're like, "Well, I'm not getting on a call until they're ready to buy." I'm like, "Cool, this is not gonna work for you."
right,
And because like I'm an introverted guy, right? I love hopping on the calls and helping people troubleshoot through their call. Like it like there's a lot of social situations that drain my battery, but that actually, gets me excited, gets me ramped up and stuff. And so if you don't like talking to these people about these problems and their challenges and their gaps, you're not gonna make it. Like it's just categorically not. So thank you for talking about that because it's something that I have to kind of bludgeon people with and they're like, John, is it really that deep? And it's like, you're gonna build a whole business around this thing and you don't even want to talk to these people. Like what there's no snowball's chance in hell of you actually getting to where you're trying to go if you don't want
mhm,
to talk to the people. That doesn't make any sense. Thank you for talking to that point because it's one of those ones. It's like once you see it, you can't unsee it. But
right,
I've met so many people that are resistant to going and having those early stage conversations and just learning from the people that they want to serve. And it's like, oh, if you don't get past this, you need to go find something else to do.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely, because yeah, there's just so many people in the world, and some people know, some people are figuring it out, but
mhm,
the more you can be open to really being of service to somebody, the more people there are to meet and connect with.
absolutely. Last question, James. When you've been in the space for a while, and the world is obviously changing every day with all these AI tools and everything else like this, right? For someone who's going to start today and they're going to put themselves out there as a coach, what is your advice for day one?
Day 1, look at the people closest to you, understand and meet with them, connect with them, understand what's happening in their world, and truly listen,
Mm,
because most people uh, hear what's happening for someone else and they're just going, oh, okay, well, hopefully you figure that out. When you very well may be able to help them and you can make an invitation to speak more and potentially helping them. And a lot of times it's so tempting to search everywhere else but the people
Oh,
closest around us. And you have friends, you have family, you have people that you've connected with over the years. Check in, see how they're doing because they are even more likely to hire you.
mhm.
And they'll hire you because you're creating a committed time to be together and not just listen as a friend.
Yeah. It's always odd to me whenever people don't wanna go to their existing network for those, like, initial conversations, right? 'Cause they've never tapped their network, they've never been a big networker, and so they would rather turn to completely cold traffic, like, people who don't know them at all, than face a little bit discomfort over here of opening themselves up and trying to get conversations to where there's the highest likelihood when you're new, you know? I
Right.
love that. James, really appreciate the time. And this is such a deep conversation. As I said, I'm hoping that everyone is kind of down a couple of gears so that way they can hear some of this like deeper nuance that we're talking about. If people want to come learn more about you and the work that you do, where would you invite them to come follow up and hang out with you?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I'll say something that, most people probably wouldn't. But even if you're getting to the end of this interview, listen to it again because there is so much gold in here if you are open to truly receiving it. And the other thing that I know a lot of people say at the end of an interview, they say, "Oh, shoot me a message." What I would encourage you to do is if you hear something in here for yourself, let me know because that's how I know that what I'm talking about and the work that I'm doing is making a difference. And I've served so many people over the years that I'm happy to share a resource or an additional interview or something specific on what might be happening. I've covered things on relationships and all different topics.
Mhm.
And so whatever you hear for yourself, you can find me at jmwightman.com. And you can see client stories there, and if you have something for yourself, just shoot me a message, and we'll go from there.
Awesome. James, thank you so much for doing this. If there have been a couple of people who have made genuine asks like that, you know, and
Mm.
it's really cool whenever people do. So I hope that people kind of take you up on it. And if they feel something from this or, you know, they've got some new perspective that they do reach out to you. But really appreciate you coming on. And I really think that this is going to help people that are, you know, moving slow enough that they're open to some new ideas and really just appreciate the time, man. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much for having me, and you too, and I appreciate everyone who's listening.